for the next part of today's meeting, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Eve Cobain, Senior Research Officer here at AONTAS, who's going to give us a really interesting talk about the recent research projects, North, South, and All Island, that AONTAS have been involved in. So over to you, Eve.
Thanks a million, Connor, and really, really good to see you all this afternoon. It's just really exciting to see so many people interested in this meeting and so many familiar faces online as well. So as Connor said, yeah, we thought it would be useful since we've been engaging in a range of community education projects through the research, both North and South. Just to share a little bit about that work, like Connor, this is going to be a whistle-stop tour just around, what has really helped to build our knowledge of the practice of community education in terms of understanding its impact and also the issues really facing the sector, both North and South, just in terms of really painting a picture of where we've come from and getting input today around where we might go next. And I was actually just at a European conference in Hamburg last week, and one of the really interesting takeaways was that when we presented our most recent research, people came back to say like how amazing that we have this shared practice of community education, both North and South, and what an amazing space for deliberation that can be as well. So just as we begin, I want to take us back to 2020. It seems like quite a long time ago now to me. I've had two children since then. But that was when we really began our own in-house community education research with our first CEN census. And the census really provides us with an overview of the work being done in community education. And it was very much shaped in response to COVID-19 at that time. And when we began to plan the project, I suppose we discussed the possibility of it being an all-island piece of research, but because it was a pilot piece of work, and our main base was the CEN, and at that time most of our members, I think maybe almost all of our members in the CEN were in the Republic. We decided to actually just base it on our membership in the South. But then following this census, we did some scoping work in the North with Colin Nealons, who Connor has already mentioned, and we subsequently replicated this project in the North in 2022. So myself and Colin in 2023 launched this work, and we published AONTAS Northern Ireland Community Education Census, which a few of the colleagues in AONTAS were involved with as well. And we were really delighted at that time to be able to launch it in Stormont with a really, really good attendance on the day. So the report was really envisaged as a resource for policymakers and community education practitioners and anyone interested in community education in the North. And I think, it is quite a broad field. I think there's a lot of people doing community education work who wouldn't necessarily see themselves primarily as community education providers. So I think that's always something in our mind when we're talking to people across the island about the practice as well. And in undertaking the work, we did a survey with 60 organisations. So that was 60 organisations in the North completed the survey, and we spoke to learners through a focus group as well as practitioners, and conducted further interviews with practitioners. So the findings of that research really show community education to have a profound impact in Northern Ireland, with the 60 organisations who completed the survey delivering 798 courses to more than 50,000 learners. And I think Solace data in the Republic would indicate that I think there was 45,000 learners in 2024. So if you think about the whole scale of what is being delivered across the island, it really is phenomenal. So I was looking back at the recommendations from the research, which is now 3 years old, and in some ways these are even more urgent and look even bolder given the current state of play. And of course, many of these recommendations were also still applicable in the South. We called for ring-fenced funding for community education, greater recognition in terms of inclusion in policy and policy making at local and regional levels, a single strategy for adult learning that unites all the providing sectors, and then finally further investment into impact measurement. And this is one that actually really did come to fruition. And that takes me on to our next report, In 2024, the Department for the Economy, who I'm delighted to see here today, commissioned the Alliance for Lifelong Learning, who are the Open University, OCNNI, Forum for Adult Learning, AONTAS, IC2, and CO3. They commissioned us to undertake a report on impact measurement in adult education in NI, and myself and Colin worked on that report together on behalf of the Alliance. So the report really takes the temperature of adult education impact measurement in the North, and it looks at current approaches to and experiences around the impact process. It was a 6-month study, breakneck speed, and it comprises findings from a survey which was completed by 48 organisations, as well as focus groups with providers, funders, and learners engaging in adult education, and interviews with providers and funders. And the purpose of the report wasn't really to arrive at any one ideal model, but to provide an insight into the experiences and viewpoints of the various players in the impact process, and really to highlight some of the ways, I suppose, that these processes could be better supported. And this was important, we felt, to those in the sector, as who want to show the contribution of adult learning both to individual learners and community life. And there's many factors, which make this challenging, in terms of resources allocated, and such. And also, in the absence of accreditation, obviously there's a large number of non-accredited courses within the sector, and in the absence of accreditation, it can be hard to show this impact. So we launched this report following on from the NI census in Stormont. And one of the key, I suppose, recommendations coming out of that piece of research was around a learner forum, and having a structured kind of space for learner input and feedback. And I know there's been a lot of further work and discussion around that, which has been great to see. And I think it was also a really exciting piece of work in terms of, it was the first piece of research conducted by the Alliance, who are obviously a crucial network for us to be involved with, in terms of the North, and are a great link with the department as well. So the next stage of the journey was our first all-island piece of research, and I think that's the most pertinent piece to be thinking about today, which Connor has already flagged. This was AONTAS's first advocacy research collaboration. Myself and Rebecca worked on this together, and it was called Community Education for Social Transformation. And though it was a brief piece, just 3 months, it was really exciting for us to work on, because I think it really lays the foundation for our all-island work. And I know the advocacy team and others have been working with this focus over the past number of months. So to give you the research in a nutshell, it highlights the transformative impacts of community education across the whole island. All stakeholder groups recognise the unique position of the sector, and the organisations at the heart of their communities, which I don't need to really tell any of you about. The flexible relational approach within the sector enables learners who really would be excluded elsewhere to re-engage in education, and sometimes to engage for the first time. And the wraparound supports, encompassing emotional, social, and practical assistance, are really central to sustaining participation and progression, with really benefits extending far, far beyond employability. Though there's a lot of detail around how that, when learners desire to see that outcome, that's supported as well. So learners consistently report increased confidence, improved well-being, stronger family relationships, and a greater sense of social connectedness. And of course, communities also benefit, as learners are empowered to identify and address local challenges collectively, strengthening civic engagement and democratic participation. And that was the focus of the conference paper last week in Hamburg. Meanwhile, the research shows that community education faces a persistent struggle for recognition and sustainable funding. So despite clear evidence of the impact, the sector is constrained by short-term, fragmented and inadequate resourcing. And this is obviously across the whole island. So it's a really important piece to come together on. In the Republic of Ireland, provision is formally recognised, but it remains underfunded relative to its scale, with allocations failing to reflect the true cost and demand. I think it's currently 2% of the overall FET budget. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And in the north, the situation is more acute. Community education lacks visibility really in high level strategies and is heavily reliant on precarious piecemeal philanthropic funding. So, if anything, we've really seen more cuts since we undertook this research. Since we undertook the census, ESF was lost within the sector, and since we undertook the piece with the Alliance, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund has been replaced by the Local Growth Fund. So there's been a lot of change as well. And naturally, the funding context is having a negative impact on what can be delivered and a knock-on effect on staff morale and well-being. So it's against this backdrop, really, I think that collaboration emerges, both as a strength and a necessity. Community education, educators, policymakers, and higher and further education institutions are increasingly working together to develop accredited pathways, including apprenticeships, community-based higher education, and community-based higher education programs. And collaboration is happening both locally and across the whole island. And I'm sure some of you have already picked up on this in the introductions among yourselves there. And there were some really great examples from providers of work being done to support skills sharing across the island when we conducted those focus groups. Practitioners described the importance of being able to pull resources around key issues like misinformation, because many groups are working in this area and facing these social issues, whether they be in the north or the south. And it was felt that greater collaboration between the providers themselves and in collaboration with policy stakeholders from across the whole island would really enhance the shared response to these common issues. And one provider described this need really well when they, in the research, I think when they commented that multiple interconnected collaborative responses at strategic level are needed as well as on the ground, as well as a shared sense that the North and South needs to come together on this. So I think that was really a very useful piece for me in terms of thinking about how we need to step forward with our own work in this regard. So a number of organisations, as I said, were already engaging in very successful cross-border partnerships and sharing practice around areas of expertise. And there was one excellent example of a group in Belfast who were working and receiving training from a group in Longford. And it would be great to hear more of these kind of examples today to build our own awareness of what's happening. However, it was clear in the research that collaboration can also be driven by scarcity as providers pool very limited resources. So while collaboration is critical, we are also very mindful that it can't be seen as a substitute for significant structural investment. And that's something we're, of course, always advocating for. And I think even stronger when we can advocate together across the whole island. So it's in the spirit, that spirit, I suppose, that we want to enter into conversation with you, looking at the possibilities for building on this work and these relationships and thinking about how we can work together to advocate for the needs of the whole sector across the island. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Eve, for running